He chose war over her love and lost everything. Now his broken Luna has returned, and she must choose to forgive him or leave him forever. The wind carried memory. Not sound, not scent, but memory. It scraped across the frostlands in hollow whispers, dragging with it the echo of a woman's cry and the clash of steel. Alpha Rion Kalen stood alone on the fortress wall, eyes fixed on the valley below, where the snow had buried an entire generation of his mistakes. Beneath that white silence lay bones, banners, and the ghosts of his arrogance. Years had passed, yet the night he'd chosen war still replayed behind his eyelids, the moment Oren's voice had broken trying to stop him. He had been young then, untouchable. She'd begged him not to march, not to challenge the rival Alpha who had slaughtered border villages, but offered parley. "Peace," she'd said, voice trembling in the candlelight. "Let me speak to them. I can make them listen." And he'd laughed. Peace was for the weak. Peace was for... When the smoke cleared 3 days later, the frostlands were painted red, and Oren was gone, taken by the same enemy he had sworn to destroy. For months he had searched the snows, tearing apart outposts until his own men feared him more than the rogues. When he finally accepted she was dead, he built Frostfall Keep upon the ruins, vowing never to forgive himself, nor the gods who had watched her fall. Now winter had come again, and with it the storm. A horn echoed faintly from the lower ramparts. The gate guards were shouting. Rion's wolf stirred under his skin, a slow, restless growl he hadn't felt in years. He descended the stone stairs, boots striking frost, the air sharp enough to cut. 2 scouts waited in the courtyard, half frozen, half terrified. Between them hung a limp figure draped in furs too large for her body. The snow around her boots was streaked with blood. Rion's voice came out as a whisper, rough with disbelief. "Where did you find her?" "By the ruins of Black Hollow," one scout said. "She was half buried, the enemy's gone, Alpha, only corpses left." The wind tugged the hood back. Long strands of pale hair spilled out, white now, though once it had been gold. Her skin was gray from cold, her lips cracked, but the scent struck him like lightning. His lungs refused to draw air. Oren. He moved before thought, tearing his cloak free and wrapping it around her, his hands shaking as he lifted her into his arms. She weighed nothing. Her eyes fluttered open, cloudy and distant, like frost-covered glass. "It's me," he breathed. "Oren. It's Rion." No flicker of recognition, only the smallest recoil, as though his voice burned. He carried her through the silent halls to the chamber that had once been hers. The tapestries were gone. He had stripped them years ago, unable to bear the sight. Laying her on the bed felt like touching something sacred and broken. "Send for the healer," he ordered. The scout hesitated. "Alpha." Her wrists. Rion froze. The furs slid aside, revealing bruises shaped like shackles, half-healed, skin rubbed raw where iron had bitten deep. The scent of fear and silver lingered. He dismissed the others with a growl, the door slamming shut behind them. The fire crackled weakly, painting her in amber light. Oren lay still, eyes open but vacant, her breath shallow. He knelt beside her, unable to look away from the marks his pride had carved into her fate. His hand hovered near her face, but didn't touch. He remembered how that face had once turned toward him with laughter, how her wolf had sung with his beneath the moons. Now, silence. "I should have listened," he whispered. "Gods forgive me. I should have listened." Outside, the blizzard rose again, hammering against the windows like the war drums of ghosts. Rion bowed his head to the floor, the snowlight reflecting in his eyes like glass shards. Far above the keep, the moon broke through the storm clouds, silver light spilling across the frostlands, touching her face, tracing the scars, and shimmering faintly against the broken pendant at her throat. The same pendant he had given her the night he was crowned Alpha. Half shattered now, like her. He didn't know if the gods offered second chances, But the moment her chest rose in a thin, fragile breath, something inside him shifted. A pulse he hadn't felt since the day she was taken. Hope, cruel and bright. He clasped her cold hand between his and bowed his head. "The war's over, Oren," he whispered. "This time, I'll fight for you." The fire flared higher, scattering sparks that drifted like falling snow. Outside, the storm screamed. But within Frostfall Keep, for the first time in years, the Alpha's heartbeat echoed with something more than regret. The fortress had never known quiet like this. The halls of Frostfall Keep used to hum with wolf song, with laughter and low growls echoing from stone and fire. Now only the storm spoke, the same storm that had swallowed years of Rion's searching. For seasons uncounted, he had ridden through endless snowfields, through ravaged villages, chasing rumors of a golden-haired captive. Each time he'd found only ashes, only bones. Each time he returned to Frostfall, a little less man and a little more ghost. Until tonight. Oren lay in their bed now, the same carved oak frame that had once witnessed vows whispered beneath moonlight. The linens had long since been replaced, yet he remembered the exact place her hair used to rest on the pillow, how her scent had soaked the wool. Now that scent was faint, buried beneath cold and blood and time. He sat at the edge of the mattress, watching the small rise and fall of her breathing. Every so often her fingers twitched, as though chasing memories through dreams. The healer, gray-bearded and trembling, had warned him she might never speak again. Years in captivity broke wolves in ways no herb could mend. Rion stayed anyway, hour after hour. He could not bring himself to sleep. When the fire dimmed, he fed it. When her lips parted in shallow gasps, he pressed water to them. He whispered her name over and over, afraid silence would claim her again. The door creaked open. Beta Thalen entered quietly, bowing his head. "She should be resting in the infirmary, Alpha." It is our chamber," Rion said softly, without looking up. "She belongs here." Thalen hesitated. "And when she wakes, what will you say to her?" Rion finally turned his gaze, eyes rimmed with sleepless frost. "The truth." The beta swallowed, nodded once, and withdrew. When the door shut, Rion leaned forward, resting his forehead against the back of Oren's hand. He could feel the faint pulse there, fragile but steady. He whispered, half prayer, half confession. "I searched for you. Through every border, every ruin. I tore the world apart, and still it wasn't enough. I thought death had taken you because that was easier to bear than the thought you were alive. And I failed you." Her fingers twitched again. He lifted his head sharply, watching, holding his breath. Her eyes opened, just barely, and for an instant he saw the storm reflected in them. Not the storm outside, but the one within her. She looked at him and recoiled, the faintest flinch, so small yet sharper than any blade. Rion's voice broke. "Oren, it's me. It's Rion." No answer, just a slow blink as if the name meant nothing. He forced a smile that hurt his face. "You're safe now. No one will ever touch you again." Her gaze flickered, not with recognition, but fear. She tried to sit up, trembling, the chain marks on her wrists catching the firelight. Rion reached to steady her, but the instant his hand touched her arm, she recoiled again, a strangled sound slipping from her throat. He froze. The firelight showed tears he hadn't realized he shed. He withdrew his hand slowly, palms open. "Forgive me," he murmured. "I won't touch you unless you ask." She sagged back against the pillows, chest rising too fast, eyes glassy and distant. He rose and paced the room, trying to cage the instinct of his wolf that roared for her scent, for her closeness. He wanted to gather her into his arms and promise she'd never hurt again. But the moment he moved too near, that broken look came back, as if he were the monster in her nightmares. So he kept his distance. Days bled into one another. Snow piled against the windows like the world itself wanted to bury them. The pack whispered that their Luna was broken, that perhaps the gods had cursed her for her mate's pride. Rion silenced them with a single glare, yet he could not silence himself. At night, when she slept, he sat by the hearth and carved small figures from pine wood. Wolves, birds, anything his hands remembered from before. Sometimes, in the faint flicker of firelight, he thought he saw her eyes following the movement. But when he looked directly, she was still, a statue carved from grief. One dawn, he woke to the sound of movement. Oren stood by the window, the thin nightgown fluttering in the cold draft. The snow outside painted her in silver light. She was staring at the horizon, expression unreadable. Rion rose carefully, not to startle her. "You shouldn't stand. You're still weak." She didn't turn. Her voice, when it came, was barely sound, a hoarse whisper cracked from disuse. "Why?" The single word shattered him more than any scream could have. He took a slow step forward. "Why what, Oren?" "Why did you start the war?" she said, eyes still on the distant mountains. Rion's throat closed. He wanted to answer, to spill apologies like blood on the snow, but the truth tangled with guilt until all that escaped was a broken whisper. "Because I thought I could win." She turned then, eyes meeting his, not recognition, but accusation. "You did win." She lifted her scarred wrists. "This is victory?" He fell to his knees before her without thought. "No, this is my punishment." For a heartbeat, silence hung between them. Then she stepped back, retreating toward the bed, every movement measured like she was moving through shards of glass. Rion lowered his head. "You don't have to forgive me," he said softly. "Just let me keep you safe." Her reply came so faint he almost missed it. "I was safe. Before you." She turned away, lying down once more, the wall between them rebuilt. Rion remained kneeling long after she closed her eyes. Snow filtered through the cracks of the shutters, gathering on the floor beside him. He didn't brush it away. Outside, dawn crept pale and merciless over the frostlands, and within Frostfall Keep, the Alpha who had commanded armies now knelt before a single broken woman, and the ghosts of his own making. Days learned the shape of silence. Frostfall Keep moved around them in careful circles, guards changing posts, cooks stoking fires, the Beta delivering reports, in a voice that never rose above a murmur. Yet every corridor seemed to end at the same threshold, their chamber, where a woman lay with winter in her bones and a man kept vigil like a penitent before a shrine. Oren slept in fits, catching breath as if memory tightened around her ribs. When she woke, she watched the snow fall through the narrow window and spoke rarely. Rion learned to measure hope by the smallest things. When she sipped broth without flinching, when her eyes tracked his hand as he refilled the pitcher, when she chose to sit instead of lie down, spine straight as a drawn bow. The pack's whispers seeped through stone. "A Luna who does not speak," someone muttered near the kitchens. "A Luna who cannot stand the Alpha's touch," another breathed at the cistern. Rion's name traveled with the words like a wound. He let the rumors cut. Pain was clearer than the numb years he had earned. Thalin came each morning with scrolls and updates, leaving them by the hearth when Oren was awake. Once, when she slept, he asked, "How long will you keep the doors barred?" "They are unbarred," Rion said, surprised by the bitterness in his own voice. "There are guards to keep others out, not to keep her in." "She has not crossed the threshold," the Beta replied gently. "Some doors lock from the inside." Rion looked over his shoulder at the sleeper, at the knit of her brow even in rest. "Then we wait," he said, "until the lock remembers it was only ice." The first break came one afternoon when the snow thinned to a chalky drift. Oren rose without wavering and walked to the chest by the wall. She lifted its lid and stared at the contents. A folded cloak of soft gray, trimmed in black fur, a pair of gloves he had commissioned the winter after she vanished, never worn. She touched the gloves like artifacts from a world where her hands had not been bound. "May I?" she asked, voice low, as if speaking to herself. Rion stood at a distance that did not frighten her. "They're yours." She slid her fingers into the gloves and pulled the cloak around her shoulders. The fabric pooled on the floor. She had lost weight, the way captives do. He swallowed and said nothing of it. When she turned toward the door, he stepped aside. Her gaze flicked to his. Not warmth, not even recognition, but a kind of acknowledgement. He followed at a respectful distance as she walked the corridor, past the carved wolves that lined the hall, past tapestries that had once displayed their union and now hung bare. Servants pretended not to stare. Rion did not pretend. By the time they reached the inner courtyard, winter had drawn breath again. Snow fell in small, stubborn flakes, settling on the black stone like ash. A raven watched from the wellhead, head tilted. Oren paused and reached into the feed basin, tossing a handful of grain. The bird hopped closer, bold in its hunger, and the faintest shadow of a smile passed over her mouth, so quick he might have dreamed it. A young guard, newly sworn, untested by more than weather, stepped from the arch, eyes catching on the scars that cuffed Oren's wrists. His lip curled with the careless cruelty of boys. "Alpha," he said too loudly, "is she fit to stand among us?" Rion did not raise his voice. "Kneel," he said. The guard blinked, unsure he had heard. Rion took a step that sent cold through the courtyard. "Kneel," he repeated, and the stone swallowed the word whole. The boy dropped to one knee, face blanching. Rion stopped an arm's length away from him, the distance he had taught himself to keep. "You see her scars," he said. "I see the price of my arrogance. You will never speak of them as shame." "Yes, Alpha," the guard whispered, breath clouding the air. Oren watched, expression unreadable. The raven hopped, flicked snow from its beak, and flew. That night, the Pack Council demanded a hearing. They met in the long hall beneath the antlered chandelier. Rion stood at the head. Oren remained in their chamber, with a brazier lit by his hand. The old wolves laid out their fears like chessmen, a Luna who would not speak, an Alpha whose remorse weakened their edge, raiders testing the borders now that winter made fools of scouts. The words grated against stone. Rion let them speak. When they were done, he said, "If you doubt me, challenge me. If you doubt her, leave my table and my protection. I'll not argue either." They stared back in the thick quiet of men who had seen his blade shed blood. None moved. Thalin's mouth twitched. Rion couldn't tell if it was relief or sorrow. When he returned to their chamber, she was awake, sitting at the edge of the bed, with her cloak around her shoulders. The brazier threw a soft glow that turned the scars on her wrists to pale ropes. "You defended me," she said, tone flat, statement rather than gratitude. "I failed you first," he answered. "Anything after is only debt." She looked toward the window where snow brushed against the panes. "They fear a silent Luna." "They fear what they don't understand," he said. "So do I." Her gaze returned to him, not sharp but clear. "I do not need your fear." "What do you need?" he asked. The question hung. Oren's throat worked once, as if words were a door she wasn't sure would lead to air. "A locked room with no chains," she said finally. "A night without waking up afraid. A day when the smell of iron means tools in a forge and nothing else. Shoes that do not blister when you run." He swallowed. "The doors of this keep open at your will. The forge burns with cedar, not iron shavings. We can have the cobbler remake every pair of boots in Frostfall if—" Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time he heard a ghost of the woman he had loved in the sharpness of her interruption. "You always thought you could fix anything with orders." He took that like a blade. "No, only with time I don't deserve." She said nothing. He remained standing, hands at his sides, tethered by her silence. In the days that followed, their rituals grew edges. Oren began to walk the corridors alone in the mornings, the cloak's hem whispering against stone. Rion shadowed her at a distance that made his wolf snarl and his guilt hush it. She visited the library and traced the spines of books without pulling any free. She watched sparring in the yard from behind a pillar, the thunk of practice blades making her flinch in rhythms he learned to measure and avoid. When the bell at the gate rang, she closed her eyes until it stopped. Once, she lost her breath. It happened in the narrow passage between the kitchens and the hall, where the ceiling pressed low and the scent of smoke shifted to old stone. She froze, fingers clawing at the invisible collar memory threw around her throat. Before Rion could move, she pressed her palm against the wall, eyes open and dry as if she refused tears as a matter of pride. He waited. When her breathing steadied, she resumed walking without looking back. That evening, he placed a small wooden wolf on the table near the brazier, the carving he'd worried at during sleepless nights. He did not say it was hers. She did not say she wanted it. At dawn, it had moved from the table to the sill by the window, nose pointed toward the snow. The fragile threads between them tightened and slackened with the weather. Beyond the keep, the Frostlands listened. Tracks appeared and vanished at the tree line. Fox, hare, something heavier that paused too long in shadows. Thalen brought word of scouts who did not return, of smoke seen briefly to the east, of a symbol carved into a pine trunk and then hacked away. Rion doubled the ramparts and sent runners along the river. Oren, hearing none of it, seemed to feel all of it. Some nights she woke with her hand on the broken pendant at her throat, as if it burned. On the 7th night after she first left the bed to walk the corridor, she stood again at the window without gloves, palms braced against the stone. Rion sat by the hearth and did not pretend to read. The brazier hissed. Snow threaded the gap in the shutters and fell in a small, stubborn drift on the floor. "I asked the wrong question," she said, voice so soft he almost mistook it for the movement of flame. "It was not why you started the war." He looked up, unwilling to breathe in case it scattered the moment. "It was why you wouldn't listen," she continued. "To me." He had thought there was no answer he hadn't rehearsed and hated, but the truth opened inside him like a crack in ice. "Because you were the only thing I feared losing," he said, "and I mistook fear for weakness. I thought if I bled the world first, I could make it stop asking for you." She turned, and this time when her eyes met his, there was recognition, but not the kind that grants absolution, the kind that names a wound. "You lost me anyway," she said. "I did," he agreed. They stood inside that admission until the brazier sighed. Oren looked back to the window. The snowfall had gentled. The courtyard lay in a white hush, the wellhead a dark ring in a field of pale. She pressed her fingertips to the sill. "The doors are unbarred," she said, almost to herself. "Yes," he answered. "Then stop standing between me and them," she murmured, and walked past him to the door. He did not move to follow until she crossed the threshold. He did not reach out when the corridor swallowed her shadow. He let the distance be a promise instead of a punishment, and for the first time, the hallway beyond their chamber did not feel like a road leading only to ruin. When he stepped into the corridor a few breaths later, a draught kissed his cheek, colder than the rest of the keep. He frowned. The casement at the far end stood open a sliver, snow feathering the sill. It was a window the servants kept latched against storms. Rion brushed the drift with the back of his fingers. Beneath the light powder lay a smear of soot, thin as a fingerprint. He closed the casement gently and looked toward the stair where Oren's shadow had gone. Somewhere beyond, a hinge whispered. Somewhere below, a boot scuffed stone in a rhythm a wolf would not make. The fractures in the ice had found their shape. He felt the old world shifting underfoot, something moving toward them through the snow, not memory, not guilt, but hands and steel. Rion turned his face to the corridor's cold and followed the faint path her footsteps had drawn, the promise he had made to keep distance thinner than paper, ready to tear it the instant the air smelled of danger. The keep woke to alarm bells that hadn't rung in years. By the time Rion reached the lower hall, the scent of blood threaded the corridors, thin, metallic, unfamiliar. Snow gusted through the open gate as guards dragged in the body of a stranger wrapped in furs marked with the sigil of the Broken Moon Pack. A spy, maybe, or a warning. Thalen met him on the stair. "They've crossed the river," he said. "Scouts say a dozen, maybe more." Rion's mind snapped into the old rhythm of command. Orders fell from his lips like instinct. Fortify the east wall, light the signal pyres, send runners to the ridge. Yet beneath every command, a separate pulse beat. Where was Oren? He found her in the courtyard, cloak drawn tight, eyes lifted to the gray horizon where smoke blurred the line between sky and mountain. She had come when the bells rang. She hadn't fled. That small act hit harder than any spear. "Inside," he said, low. "It's not safe." Her gaze slid to him, steady. "It never is." A shout from the rampart cut the air. Arrows hissed. The gate shuddered as something heavy struck its outer face. The war he'd once unleashed had come home. Rion drew steel. "Stay behind me." He didn't look back, but he felt her there, the way a heartbeat feels its echo. The gate splintered, and the courtyard filled with chaos, snow and iron, wolves shifting mid-stride, the clash of fur and blade. He moved through it like a storm given purpose, cutting down every intruder who reached the inner wall. Oren stood near the brazier pit, breath forming clouds. One of the raiders broke through the line and lunged for her. Rion turned too late. She moved first. She caught the attacker's wrist and drove a dagger into his side with the surety of someone who had done this before. Too many times. Blood sprayed the snow, bright and wrong. The man fell. Oren stared at her hand as though it belonged to someone else. Rion reached her then, catching her elbow before she swayed. Her eyes were wide, unfocused. "You're safe," he said. She shook her head. "No one is safe. They always come back." "They won't." Another arrow whined past and struck the stone beside them. Without thinking, he pulled her close, shielding her with his body. The shaft grazed his shoulder, slicing through cloak and skin. The pain was hot and clean. She gasped as blood darkened the fur at his collar. "You're hit!" He tightened his hold, half to steady her, half to keep standing. "I've had worse." Her fingers trembled against his chest, pressed hard over the wound. Warmth surged beneath her palm. Not healing, not magic, just contact. For a heartbeat, his vision blurred, and through the haze he saw her wolf flicker behind her eyes, silver and fierce, a spark fighting to live. Guards dragged the last of the attackers toward the gate. The courtyard fell to quiet, save for the wind and the crackle of torches. Rion swayed, exhaustion and blood loss catching up. Oren steadied him without thinking. The moment stretched, her hands, his breath, the snow between them melting to water. "I told you once that war would take everything," she whispered. "And it did," he said. "Except this." He sank to one knee before her. The movement wasn't for balance. It was surrender. "I chose pride over you once," he said, voice rough. "I won't again. If you can't forgive me, then at least know this. Your pain was mine to bear, and I failed. Let me atone, Oren. Let me start with this." He reached for the chain around his neck, the mark of command, carved with the sigil of Frostfall, and laid it on the ground between them. She stared at it, at him. "You would kneel before me? Before all of them?" "I already have," he said simply. Her throat worked, words gathering and breaking. "You can't erase what happened." "I don't want to erase it," he answered. "I want to remember every breath, so I never become that man again." Oren's eyes shone wet in the half-light. The sound of wind filled the silence between them. At last she said, "Stand up, Rion." He obeyed slowly, blood dripping from his sleeve. She studied him, the sharp planes of his face softened by fatigue, the snow caught in his hair, the faint tremor that betrayed how much he'd lost to keep her safe. Something inside her shifted, a crack, small but real, where warmth might someday live again. When the healers came, she let them tend him. She even pressed the cloth to his shoulder herself, ignoring his protest. His blood stained her fingers. She didn't wipe it away. By nightfall, the dead were cleared from the courtyard. The fires burned higher, casting the keep in bronze light. Rion stood by the parapet, bandaged, watching the pyres. Auron joined him. The wind lifted her hair, white strands catching flame-colored glow. "Your people will expect strength," she said quietly. "They'll see it," he replied. "In you." Her lips parted in surprise. "Me? You faced them. You stood your ground. They'll remember that longer than they'll remember who swung the sword." She looked down at the scars on her wrists. "You still believe strength is something others can see." He turned to her. "Then teach me what it is." For the first time, her expression softened. "It's not taught. It's survived." He wanted to say more, but she stepped closer, close enough that her breath mingled with his in the cold. Her eyes searched his face, the line of his jaw, the wound on his shoulder, the shadow of the man he'd been. "You carry ghosts," she murmured. "They're all I deserve." "Then let them rest," she said. And for a heartbeat her gloved hand brushed his cheek, light, uncertain, but real. It was not forgiveness, but it was something alive. When she turned away, her cloak caught the wind and flared like wings. He watched until she vanished into the stairwell, the echo of her steps leaving a rhythm his heart fell into. In the empty courtyard, the snow began to fall again, soft, clean, covering the stains of battle, filling the prints where an alpha had knelt to the woman he had once destroyed. The storm eased, but the air still tasted of ash. The pyres had burned through the night, leaving the courtyard veiled in smoke that drifted like ghosts between the walls. When the first weak light of dawn spilled across the snow, Rion found Auron there, standing amid the remnants of fire and battle. She hadn't slept, neither had he. She looked almost spectral in the dimness, white hair tangled, cloak undone, bare hands folded before her as though afraid to move. For a moment, he simply watched her breathe. It was the first morning he hadn't feared she might vanish if he blinked. "You should be inside," he said quietly. "I needed to see the sun." Her voice was steadier than he remembered, though rough around the edges, as if unused to warmth. He stepped beside her. "It barely reaches this far north." She tilted her face toward the light anyway. "Then I'll take what I can." They stood together in silence. Wind slipped between the stones, carrying with it the faint scent of pine smoke and thawing earth. It had been years since he'd noticed the smell of spring. She broke the quiet first. "When I was taken, they told me you'd never come, that an alpha's pride was worth more than his Luna's life." He closed his eyes. They were right. Then. She studied him, unreadable. "And now?" "Now," he said, "my pride is what I'd give to bring you peace." Her breath caught, a fragile sound. "Peace isn't given." "I know." He met her gaze. "But I'll spend what's left of me earning it." Auron turned back to the pyres, where the last embers smoldered. "They used to make us light fires like that," she murmured, "to watch what we loved burn." He wanted to reach for her hand, but stopped himself. "You're free of them." Her jaw tightened. "Freedom isn't forgetting." "No," he said. "It's remembering and surviving anyway." Something flickered in her eyes, anger, sorrow, maybe both. Then she exhaled and walked toward the inner gate, each step sinking into snow that had begun to soften beneath the dawn. Later, in the great hall, the pack gathered to honor the fallen. Auron stood apart near the window, her silhouette framed by pale light. Rion spoke to his wolves of vigilance, of unity, of rebuilding, but his words felt hollow until he looked at her. "Our enemies took what we loved most," he said, voice low but carrying. "We will not answer with vengeance. We will answer by living." The wolves bowed their heads, a ripple of assent. When the hall emptied, Oren approached him. "You speak of mercy," she said. "Will they follow you for it?" "They'll follow strength," he replied. "They'll learn that mercy is the truest kind." She hesitated, then asked, "And if I can't?" "If you can't what?" "Be the Luna they remember." He smiled without mirth. "Then they'll remember the one who stands beside me now." For the first time, her shoulders eased. "You sound certain." "I have to be," he said. "If I falter, they'll lose both of us." She studied him a long moment. "You've changed," he almost laughed. "Regret is an effective teacher." That night, the keep was quiet. The fires burned low, casting gold against stone. Oren wandered the corridors alone, tracing her fingers over the carvings that marked generations of alphas. The walls hummed faintly with warmth. When she reached their chamber, she found the wooden wolf he'd carved earlier sitting on the windowsill, its muzzle lifted toward the stars. She turned it over in her hand. Beneath one paw, he'd etched a symbol, a crescent moon broken through by a line of light, the mark of Frostfall, of her. She looked toward the bed where he slept, shoulders bowed even in rest. For the first time, she didn't see the alpha who'd failed her. She saw the man who'd knelt in blood and snow and dared to stay. Quietly, she placed the carving back and drew the furs over his shoulders before lying down beside him. Not close, not touching, but near enough that his warmth brushed her skin. His breathing steadied hers until the storm outside faded into nothing more than wind. When morning came, she woke to find him gone. A folded cloak rested where he had been, and beside it, a letter sealed in wax. "Oren," it read, "I ride east to meet the pack's scouts. I'll return before dusk. The gates will remain open. No locks, no guards to bar your way. You are free to walk where you will." She read the words twice, then looked at the open door. Sunlight cut a bright path across the floor. For a long moment she stood at the threshold, torn between fear and something fragile rising beneath it. Then she stepped forward. One step, then another. The corridors no longer seemed to lean over her. The air felt lighter, as if the keep itself exhaled. She walked until she reached the courtyard and the open gates beyond. The wind met her like an old friend, cold, sharp, but honest. She took another step, and another, until her boots met untouched snow outside the walls. The world stretched wide before her, white and endless. She closed her eyes and let the wind pull at her hair, breathing deep until her chest stopped aching. Behind her, the sound of hooves broke the quiet. She turned. Rion rode toward her, his black cloak snapping behind him, silver-threaded horse steaming in the cold. He dismounted, breath heavy from the run. "You left the gate," he said, half astonished. "I wanted to see if I could," she replied. "And? I can." The ghost of a smile tugged at her mouth. He took a slow step closer, careful as always. "The border's safe now," he said. "No enemy left to fight." "Then maybe," she said softly, "it's time we stop fighting ourselves." He reached out, hesitant. She didn't flinch. His fingers brushed hers, rough skin against soft. The simple contact sent warmth chasing through the cold. For the first time since she'd returned, she didn't pull away. That evening, the frost began to melt from the eaves. Water dripped like slow music. In the great hall, Rion lit the hearth fire and turned to find Oren standing at his side. She reached for a branch and fed it into the flame, sparks rising like stars. "Fire beneath the frost," he murmured. She met his gaze. "It was always there. You just had to stop burying it." He smiled, small, unguarded, human. She allowed herself to return it. The silence that followed was no longer made of pain, but of something waiting to grow. Outside, the storm passed completely, leaving the Frostlands wrapped not in grief, but in the first breath of spring. And inside the keep, two hearts beat in rhythm again, uneven still, scarred still, but alive. If you like this story, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps this channel grow. Thanks for watching.